Cool. So, hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm super excited to have back on Menno Henselmans, creator of the Bayesian Bodybuilding method, and we're going to talk about that later. So, not gonna get into that too much, but you've had here on Menno before to talk about your overall kind of history, how you got into the fitness industry, and your Bayesian method. But now we're talking about something that I haven't really heard anybody asking you too much before, which is diet compliance, adopting the fitness lifestyle successfully in the long term, and self-control, adherence, these kinds of things. And as far as I know, you are currently writing a book on this topic. So maybe we could just start with that. So am I correct that you're writing a book on this topic?
Yeah, this is a surprise. I am indeed writing a book now. And it's going to be about how to stick to your diet, but a bit broader because I'm going to focus on self-control. So tentative title is Thy Will Be Done. And I'm going to look at how to stick to your diet, manage your sleep, cope with stress, also how to be more productive in life, in your business. So I'm going to take a more big picture view of these things and integrate fitness into the whole lifestyle about what I think a successful lifestyle is. And bodybuilding is a part of that. I think bodybuilding is a part of a lifestyle of continuous self-improvement. And the physical aspect is just one aspect of that. But it shouldn't restrict yourself to that, I think. But a big part of it will be how to get jacked and lean.
That is awesome. And so it's funny because me and people who have been following you for a long time, I know that when they hear this, they will be super interesting and they will be counting the days when that comes out. But what is, because for a lot of people, this will be a surprise that you're working on this. So what spurred your interest into writing this book? Because a lot of people would have expected a different book on training frequency or something like that. How come?
So in part because I want the book to be, usually when I do a seminar or a book or anything like that, I want most of the content to be new. Like many coaches, they talk about the same things, and if they write a book now on training frequency, and all my next talks would be about training frequency. But I've given that talk before. There's quite a lot of information online about this now, so I want to bring out new content, also to keep myself interested all the time. And actually, I have been working on these things a very long time. It's not like I decided like, now I want to focus on this and I'll make it a book. Because as you know, in the PT course, the compliance topic has always been a favorite. Actually, I think it's the top rated topic pretty much every course now. Because it's a surprise, people don't know these things, and many people don't look at this from an evidence-based perspective. But way before that even, I'm known for my education in economics and statistics, but formally, my education is actually known as behavioral economics. And that is very close to behavioral psychology, which is exactly the psychology of how you can change your behaviors, like being more productive, sticking to your diet, these kind of things. So I actually have a very strong scientific foundation in these areas, much more so than in exercise science and nutrition. Those are the things I mostly taught myself. But in terms of what I really learned at Warwick University and University College, I actually learned more about these kind of things. And we now have in the Bayesian team Thomas Compito, who's a psychologist, so that helps too, to do a lot of background research, and I discuss a lot of the ideas with him.
Fantastic. When speaking about adherence and self-control, now you really like on the internet, you come across as this guy who is like super rational, very like calm, analytically minded. You mentioned this a number of times yourself. Did you have any period in your life when you were struggling with like diet compliance? Like okay, you've had periods, of course, when you didn't necessarily know what you were doing in the gym, but did you ever fall off the wagon, went on binges, anything like that in your past?
Yeah, I have. I'd be lying if I would sell this book as, I've had all these problems and I overcome them using these methods. I think I definitely have, a natural inclination to have high compliance, to be disciplined and controlled. Most people quite quickly see me as such a person, a controlled person. So, but I experience all the same problems. I'm not a robot. I experience all the same problems as other people do. And, I have problems sticking to my diet, much more so now actually than earlier, because earlier I still had the motivation to, I could progress very fast, and you have that young drive as a novice lifter. And especially during my college days and the periods thereafter, I had more of the mindset that food is fuel and not really of, the enjoyment of eating. And now I actually have more of the mindset that every meal in your meal plan in your daily life should be something you enjoy, should be a really a pleasurable event, something that, in terms of happiness, there aren't that many things. If you look at the research that can directly impact happiness, you have sex, sleep, and food. Food is like directly putting happiness into your body. So I think it is a big component for like a hedonist, someone who strives to optimize well-being in their life, to actually enjoy what they eat and not just eat things purely from a mechanistic point of view to get the desired physical results. But that does come with more mental problems, that you have to balance the pleasure of eating with the results you want in the gym. So I've actually had more of these problems now than I had before, which is also part of the reason to formalize this method more. So yeah, definitely. There isn't a person in the world, I think, who has it easy, especially during something like contest prep. Even the most disciplined, strong-willed person on the planet will be facing a lot of mental difficulty in contest prep.
So when you look at the approaches of a lot of other coaches, there are a lot of kind of phrases flying around. Some people have more of like a champion's mindset. It's like, do whatever it takes. Whenever you're starting, just eat chicken and broccoli, even if you're overweight and you have no foundation. Other people say that, just make tiny little changes, are very hand-holding. When you look across the board in your colleagues, even evidence-based coaches, what are some of the approaches to changing behavior and making people successful with dieting that you would say you go against with the most and people would find it surprising?
All right, I think there are definitely two big trends there. One is more the general population, more the, mainstream approach to motivation. And one is more in the evidence-based crowd. Let's start with the mainstream one. That is, I think, the you can do it approach. That's like you continuously tell your clients they are the best, they can do it. Oh my God, it's so awesome that you've done your workout today. And you hit a PR on the bench. Fuck yeah, bro. And it doesn't have any long-term effects, I think. You're just a crutch. If someone is relying on that kind of motivation to get through their workouts and their days, then as soon as you stop the coaching, they will fall back into their previous patterns because you make them reliant on this external validation. And research generally supports this, that even self-talk is generally more motivational than someone else just saying, yeah, you can do it. It's very more enthusiasm, or it can induce arousal much more than it actually induces intrinsic motivation, as psychologists call it. So I think that is something that may have a place to foster a good client-coach relation in some people, but in terms of actually fostering long-term motivation to achieve your goals, it is almost entirely useless. And the second approach, which is probably the more more unconventional approach that I have in terms of evidence-based coaches, is that I'm not a big fan of what is currently propagated as flexible dieting. There's this idea now that it's like organic. Flexible is a good term, or it's like people see something that is marketed as natural or green or organic, and immediately they think, intuitively, there's a nice association with it, and the word flexible has that too. Same for words like variety. These are things that many people very easily accept as true, while they don't put any thought or let alone scientific support into these arguments. So you see a lot of people claiming The catharsis idea is a classic one. Goes back even to ancient Greek philosophers that sort of intuitively came up with this concept that if you have certain cravings or you develop a certain urge, then you need to let it out. Otherwise, it will build up over time and it will only get worse. And basically, that has fostered the idea of flexible dieting in the sense that you can just do whatever you want to do. And if you have a craving, you should give into it. And it doesn't really matter what you eat. You know, you can fit all of this junk food into your macros and you get the same fat loss effect. So, you know, just eat your favorite foods, even if it's McDonald's or whatever. And you can get the same results. But it doesn't work like that for most people. There is a ton of research that shows that consistency is one of the most important things as a predictor of weight loss success. So if you're comparing people, which we also have good research on that, for example, maintain a certain lifestyle, which is conventional in many bro bodybuilding communities, that throughout the midweek, they're very strict. And then the weekend, they sort of let go and they don't have a diet. They don't have a plan. They just do whatever feels good or whatever their friends are doing. And if you look at long-term compliance rates, then it is very evident that the people who are more consistent, even if they are not as strict throughout the midweek as the others, they do a lot better because they build habits, they build routines, and they actually change their lifestyle. And I think lifestyle change is a word that used to have very good connotations, but it is commonly now seen as something that is more like a hippie, alternative medicine kind of vibe. That doesn't have any scientific support, but it is really, really true. It's a cliche because it's true. Lifestyle change is really what it takes to get lean and stay lean. For example, if you're relying on an hour of cardio a day to get lean, you have to think and ask yourself, is this something you're going to be doing for the rest of your life? Because if not, and this is what it takes to get lean, how do you plan on staying this lean? Mm-hmm. Same with anything else in your diet. I think many people are concerned too much with acute choices in the moment, like do I eat this or do I eat that? And they don't think in terms of a lifestyle, like how is my life when I eat this versus how is my life when I don't eat this? And it's a lot easier to make lasting changes if you think of it in terms of a lifestyle than which you don't. And in general, in terms of food choices, I mean, rationally speaking, you can think of a food as either worth it or not worth it. A food has certain benefits, like the pleasure it gives, the protein content, fiber content. These you could see as benefits. And then negatives would generally be caloric content, if it's not satiating, if it has trans fat that is harmful to your health, these kind of things. And you weigh these, as an economist would do, and you weigh the costs and the benefits, and you decide the food is either worth it or not worth it. So from a rational point of view, it also makes sense to restrict certain foods. The problem comes when people take this to extremes, and they are what is now called in psychology a restrained eater. So they don't see it as a choice anymore. They think of a diet where a lot of people go wrong. For example, Atkins diet, they have good foods, bad foods. And they think of them that way, not because they have decided for themselves these foods are worth it or not worth it, but because it is part of the diet. And that defeats the whole purpose of diet as a lifestyle change, because actually the word diet, which is now seen as like this period of suffering that you have to go through to get the results you want, actually comes from Greek and Latin, dieta. It meant way of life, which is, of course, completely different connotation than what we now have with the word. The problem comes with people that don't see it as a choice anymore, whereas you should not think of, you cannot eat McDonald's, but you should think of it as McDonald's to me is not worth it. And this also corresponds with research finding that if you make it a habit in people to, before they eat something, ask themselves, think of the caloric content of the food. And this is something I also implement with a lot of my clients and tell them to do. Before you eat anything, especially if it's not part of your plan, consider what is the macronutritional content. And then this spurs you into thinking about costs and benefits. Because a lot of people, they have this idea that when they stop thinking about their diet, it's all reins are loose and they get, the screw it effect. And they make a lot of choices that they later end up regretting. So some things can be worth it. I'm not saying you should never have McDonald's. For some people, it may be worth it. They may like French fries so much that they're worth fitting it into their macros. It's worth consuming some trans fats for, and they accommodate the rest of their diet to fit this in. I think for most people, though, it will be very difficult to remain six-pack lean and eat McDonald's with any regularity. So as long as you keep in mind that it is a choice, it can actually be very helpful to think in terms of food as worth it and not worth it, and not enjoy the flexibility you have too much. Because there is also a lot of research showing that people actually fare better on preset meal plans. And if you look at actually successful bodybuilders, athletes, people that are actually successful long term, and I define that in terms of leanness as maintaining your six-pack year round, not just having competed or having dieted for a show or whatever and got a six-pack, and then the rest of the year people don't see. If you don't post it on Facebook or Instagram or Facebook, but actually you're still kind of chubby and you just get lean once a year. But if you look at people that actually maintain a very lean body fat percentage year round, they are almost always on set meal plans. They have little variety in their diet. Many of these clients, they are actually concerned with this. They ask me, is it okay if I eat the same stuff every day? Well, as long as you cover all nutrient bases in your diet, that is perfectly fine. There is no need to make it more flexible, induce variety. Don't fix what isn't working.
Yeah. You're really like, you're speaking from my heart with a lot of the stuff that you just said about flexible dieting. And I'm really tempted to just go on a rant and really rave about flexible dieting. But instead, I'll try to play devil's advocate here a little bit, because like what you just said about the temporary suffering period and the long-term perspective, many of the claims of the flexible diet proponents is that if you have a set meal plan, you have little variety in your diet, then that is by itself not sustainable, because you want to live life and you want to be exposed to all kinds of stuff. I think you yourself mentioned that you want to try every food on the planet. And I think that's where a lot of people can get into trouble, that they get into a routine. And yes, when you really create an environment for yourself, when you kind of isolate yourself from external kind of distractions like other foods, like social events, like going out, then it's easy to maintain a six-pack. But if you also want to live life, that's when it really becomes a balancing act of being flexible, having a flexible attitude towards food, but also still having that structure-based mindset in place. So what do you think is a sweet spot between being structured, having a meal plan, having a routine, but also being able to be flexible and saying what you're saying, that I still want to try every food on the planet?
Yeah, I think it's good to distinguish here between the type of lifestyles that people live. So my case is probably not a very good example. I actually eat at libitum, which means I don't track my macros the majority of the time, which is also what I will discuss in that book. I think a lot of people, in the very long run, should not be constantly tracking their macros. It's something you have to learn, something you'll get great results with. But once you've sort of achieved the physique that you want, at libitum dieting is probably a more convenient way to go to enjoy life for many people. So that is a bit different than what I do. And that allows me to travel, try a lot of different foods, fit these things into my diet. But the same things still apply. I still have a lot of rules. And if I, for example, try something that I know is more caloric or less satiating than my typical foods, I will see if this matches with higher energy expenditure, which is often the case during like holiday periods and where you're traveling, or at least when I'm traveling a lot. I walk a lot, ride bicycle a lot when possible. So I can factor that in, and then I make a strong distinction between things that I can eat like as a lifestyle and things that I will try once. And I always think very clearly about, is this worth it for me?
Right.
And for many people, if you're an office worker, for example, then routine and stability are definitely your friend, because when you get home, late at the end of the day, you are what researchers call in a state of ego depletion. And you do not want to be concerned about, thinking in terms of variety or mixing things up. This is the worst time possible to do this. So even if you plan on doing these things, it should be key word being a plan. And that is also for when you have social events, you're eating out with friends. I think that should be very doable to fit into a fitness lifestyle. You should still have certain guidelines that you live by and making conscious choices in these scenarios. And these can be the same kind of principles you apply in daily life as in social eating. I think the crucial thing that people do wrong is that they go either all in terms of I eat like a robot, food is fuel, I will skip all dinners with friends, or they go the completely flexible dieting route and then think, I should enjoy life, so I'm going out with friends, and that means I do everything they do, and I'm going to just drink a lot of alcohol and drink whatever they're drinking, even though I don't really like wine or alcohol, and I'm still going to eat, consume 1,000, 2,000 calories in the form of alcohol. Then my judgment's going to be completely impaired, and I'm going to make a lot of choices that the next day I end up regretting. I think a lot of these things are very hard to teach people. Beforehand, you have to teach them how to plan, make sure they make deliberate choices, and then you have to compare body composition data before and after. I find that really helps to make an objective, retrospective conclusion about whether it was worth it or not. And that's also what I always ask people if they went on a holiday or had a cheap meal or something. You look at the data, you see what kind of damage was done, how much fat they lost or how much weight they gained, and you ask them, was this worth it? And without being judgmental at all, you just objectively ask them, do you think this was worth it? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. You can also do this for pretty much any kind of food that you try. And this really facilitates making more conscious choices. So I think the solution here is to maintain certain principles, which are, the principles are fixed basically, but the diet choices you end up making aren't necessarily all or nothing.
Right. So still speaking of this temporary period versus lifestyle kind of outlook on things, first of all, what would be a few examples of things that you think it definitely falls under the category of not sustainable for most people and are commonly used ways to get fat loss, for example? So you mentioned a lot of cardio, so you wouldn't recommend that because most people will not keep that up for long. Is there anything else that comes to mind like this?
Cardio is a big one. Like I said, the idea of having 5 strict days and 2 days where you sort of do whatever, that also is pretty destined to fail, I'd say, for most people. Another big one is having a planned refeed day. Refeed is now the euphemistic term for what people used to call a cheat meal. To give an example, I've had one client who had been to, just to give an example of what I consider to be the absolute wrong mindset, had one client made pretty good fat loss up to a certain point. At some point, it seemed that the data in terms of energy intake and weight loss results were no longer matching up, which means often underreporting or lack of adherence is the likely culprit. So we discussed that. Do the first few weeks, came to the conclusion, no, adherence in all aspects seemed to be good. At some point, kept standardizing this. I have, as you know, in the PT course, also a standard form now that asks very specific and concrete questions that make it very difficult for someone not to admit that they didn't comply with the diet. And then it turned out, actually, throughout the whole period, he had been eating, having a Sunday cheat meal, basically. And this wasn't just your average, chicken or sushi, rice, something whole food. It was like nuts and chocolate and butter, those kind of things.
Right.
So I said, okay, this is probably the culprit. If you look at your data, you're basically in that single day, you're generally undoing the whole week of fat loss. And now you have to go so low in energy intake throughout the rest of the week that you could have been in contest prep basically, but that one day you undo all of the fat loss. So you have to think about whether that is worth it or not. And then it turned out he'd actually been to 5 different coaches before me, who all basically came up with the same conclusion, that he would not admit to having this cheat day in the first place. And eventually, when it came to light that it was really hard to get any leader while still having this probably 7,000 calorie day in there, that he said, yeah, at each point when that became clear, then he said, okay, he found a different coach. So I said, well, that's not really the solution. You have to think about how you're going to make this a sustainable change in your lifestyle. Because if you keep this day like this, then you have the only option that you have is either going extremely low in terms of calories for the rest of the week, which you now see is not sustainable, or you have to do something about that cheat day. And then he said, well, yeah, I do think about that cheat meal the whole week, basically, and it makes the regular diet feel terrible, which is why he had so much trouble with it. But he saw that as something to look forward to. But I find that it is not something you look forward to. It is something that makes the rest of the week suck. And that example I often give is that if you have Saturday as pancake day, then the rest of the week is thinking about pancake day. And that is for many people exactly how it is. If you have a certain cheat meal in there, it makes the rest of your diet, especially if it's something that you do not normally eat. For example, the rest of the week you find that pancakes are just not, you cannot squeeze them into your macros without being very hungry. Then, and you really don't even like them that much, then when you're go on a pancake binge on Saturday, it makes all of the other days the food you eat, and we actually see this in terms of food entrainment, taste differences, reward pathways in the brain. It just makes all the other food taste less good. And it's not just that you do any damage in terms of calories, but it's also a lot more mentally demonic for that reason. Also, it disrupts your habit and the general principles that you normally make across the week. So usually a cheat meal like that, it has a lot of negative psychological effects. It also creates a craving rather than what most people think in terms of if you give into it and you get this catharsis moment and the craving is gone. If you actually think about what happens when you had a meal like that, is the craving gone? No, absolutely not. It's there. It's stronger than ever. Next day, often already, you're thinking about, oh God, those pancakes were really good. I'd like to have those again. And it's not like you have a lot of pancakes and then, oh yeah, now I can live without pancakes for a month. That feeling lasts for about 30 minutes. It's like after you're completely hungover and a day you went binge drinking and the next morning you're like, I'm never going to drink again. And then next Saturday you're out partying again. So it's the exact same way with food. And other negative effects are that you actually create your own comfort food because you are teaching yourself that you're basically glorifying the cheat meal or the pancakes in this case, that you're creating your own comfort food. There's research in this, especially in children, that shows that if you associate this kind of food with happiness, and by association, you also tend to associate other foods then with unhappiness. So you're basically teaching yourself that pancakes are nice and other things are not nice. And this means the rest of the week is a period of suffering. And that one day of very short-lived relief generally does not weigh up to the suffering that you induce for the rest of the week. Which is why, in general, I think that cheat meals, if you want to eat something that is not part of your plan or does not fit into your usual macros, you should try to fit it into your daily meal plan. And if you want it so bad, you can work around it. For example, if I wanted to eat donuts and I'm bulking on 4,000 calories, I can probably, if I really want to, fit in 2,000 calories of donuts and then just eat soup or whatever for the rest of the day so that I won't be screaming hungry all day. And that would be a way for me to do that and not sustain any damage to my physique or have any of the negative effects. I could, in principle, if I wanted to, do that every day. And I think that is how you should think of these things and not plan in Saturday as donut day, because that is, for many people, not going to work.
I'm glad that you mentioned nuts and chocolate and those kinds of things, because I think for a lot of people, kind of accepting, so for example, saying no to ice cream and French fries because it's just not worth it is generally, I think, a lot easier because, or sometimes it almost can be easier than saying no to things like nuts and chocolate and peanut butter, which are, you could make an argument that those are healthy food. They could be part of a regular meal plan, but as you know, they're just crazy easy to overeat on. And there are some, I've fallen into this trap a lot of times before that I've tried to include peanut butter in moderation, and I could always kind of justify buying it by saying that, okay, I will just have a certain amount, and then it ended up with overeating. And for those kinds of problems, do you have any kind of set strategy you like to use?
Yeah, you have to make a very strong distinction between food in terms of healthy, in terms of nutritional value, and food that is healthy in terms of allowing you to sustain physique you want, which may not even be called the right word. It's probably not healthy. Things like the satiety index of the food are a lot more important in that regard. So the research also finds that people that think of food as healthy or, like I said, organic, these kind of things, then they become a bit desensitized to other factors such as macronutritional content. It helps to really remind people that, specifically remind people of the macronutritional content of the food. So how many calories are in this? Peanut butter, that's one scoop. You have to weigh that scoop, by the way, because what most people think is a scoop is actually more like 3 to 5 scoops, which can be a few hundred calories in a single tablespoon, which just racks up calories absurdly fast. So you have to strongly distinguish between healthy food as in being of high nutritional value and food that has an appropriate satiety index, appropriate macronutritional content, so that you can fit it into your diet. And that is crucial if you want to stay lean and not just healthy. Because, for example, paleo I think is a very good example of people that have bought into the idea successfully, often, that certain foods are worth it and certain foods are not worth it. And thereby they, especially if you combine this with high intensity serious training like CrossFit, generally get a pretty good physique. But they never, they are often at least not able to get to that next level of having like ripped abs, and they have some ab definition, but it's very hard for many of these people to get below about 15% body fat, I'd say, for the men, more like 25 for the women. And that is because they don't make that distinction. They think of foods as paleo or not paleo, and that determines whether they're worth it or not worth it. Whereas really they should be more concerned with the macros of the food rather than if it was healthy or paleo or whatever.
Right. Like one last question on this outlook, like lifestyle way of looking at things, is that do you think that to some extent it is a matter of just being cognizant of the dangers of being too extreme and just be really conscious about how you are changing your behavior once, for example, a diet is over? Because, for example, I've heard you mention that you have this strategy that you call keeping it bro. So, for example, when you're dieting down, then you're saying, okay, I'm going to give up the enjoyment of food for this period of my life. I'm just going to look at food as fuel. But obviously you have to let go of that mindset once the diet is over. So do you think that if you are very careful and you're practicing a lot of self-awareness, then it can work to some extent?
Yeah, the key difference here is when you're dieting, what I generally recommend is that people think in terms of exchanging foods for leanness. So that is a strategy I employ with a lot of clients, which is what you were referring to. And basically that means that certain foods, as your energy intake goes down across a cut, which is often the case when you're not gaining muscle so fast anymore, you're pretty advanced training, you're not getting muscle so fast anymore that your metabolism increases throughout the diet, but it decreases because of adaptive thermogenesis. and a lower body weight, then you're generally not going to be able to fit the same foods into your diet anymore as before. And this is where the traditional eat less advice fails, because people don't make these choices. They stick with the same food choices they have and try to eat less of them. And as the diet progresses, there's less fat tissue, less leptin secretion, less appetite suppression. They get hungrier and hungrier, and energy intake goes down and down and down. And they still try to fit the same highly caloric foods like bread or bread with peanut butter, those kind of things, into their diet as they did before. And it just ends up being a negative spiral of more and more inhibition of their appetite, living with hunger, and craving these foods that they have now a lot of difficulty eating until they're satiated. So I think it is crucial to make changes there in terms of the food you eat. And when you are talking about a natural trainee that undergoes cut and bulk cycles and stays within like 6-pack lean level year round, which is, I think, what most natural trainees should aspire to, stay within like a 7 to 15% body fat range where you never lose your abs. I think that is very realistic for most men. Then you want to have certain foods that you don't necessarily exclude entirely, but that are depending on your current body fat percentage. So at body fat percentage X, I can eat these kind of foods. For example, I know that whole eggs and avocado, they're okay until about contest level, and after that, I have to be a lot more stringent. Things like when you're going really deep into contest prep, I often still try to do that ad libitum as much as possible. Then at some point, you're going to end up with a very limited food selection. But that is fine, because I know that these foods are still okay for me to eat, and there are still a lot of foods that I can eat again when I'm bulking. Now, right, when you are taking this to an extreme level, which like contest prep, and you're going below this body fat percentage that you end up, that you know is sustainable for you, then by definition, you are also, you can also employ non-sustainable diet practices. And that's where keeping it bro can be very helpful, depending on the person's mindset. That is the strategy I employ to indeed think of food as fuel. And you basically give up the pleasure of eating entirely to get to your contest level leanness. That is something I only recommend if you're dieting below your sustainable body fat percentage. Because then you can imply also cardio, for example, unsustainable diet practices. Until you're at that point, I think a lot of people look too much towards the people that go to these extremes and try to fit them into their own lifestyle. Until you're at that point, you should be thinking a lot more about gradual, sustainable changes.
Right. And just for the geeks out there who love numbers like myself, what kind of body fat percentages are we talking about here once that becomes necessary or advisable?
I generally think that 7 to 15% is the reasonable guideline in terms of body fat percentage range that is sustainable. For most people, it's going to be probably closer to 9 to 13% if you're talking about men. For women, it's actually very easy to determine this if you have an intact menstrual cycle, because the lower end of the range is then when you lose your menstrual cycle. That is when your hormone levels, especially anabolic hormone levels, will become impaired to the point that they will interfere with your long-term progression. So it's probably not a smart thing to stay below that range, not to even mention well-being in this case. And women have a lot more leeway in terms of higher body fat percentage range as well, in that they have a very generally healthy metabolism. Their metabolism is a lot more resistant to glucose disorders and elevated fatty acid levels and stuff than men, which means they can often go up even to 30% or something and still be perfectly healthy. So for women, it's a lot more of a conscious choice. They have a lot more variation in how lean they actually can get and want to get. So some women may be okay with having more of the thick Brazilian look and going up to 30% body fat and just having a huge lower body, and they'll feel great at that point. Whereas other women want to stay a lot leaner and they're more like 15%. So it's a much bigger range, I'd say, for women. For men, it's definitely around the 10% range.
Right. And go ahead.
the food choices. I think 15% is for many people a pretty a notable cutoff point that I see. Going below 15% is something that, or getting to 15% is quite easy for most people. In terms of if you eat paleo or you have some system of healthy eating, then most men, and they work hard, they train hard, they can get to about 15%. And below that, the trouble starts. You have to be more meticulous with planning, psychological strategies, appetite management, those kind of things.
Yeah, and while we are on body fat percentages, actually, like I would be curious on your take on this. I talked with Eric Helms and a lot of just my friends who are into fitness. For example, on the Performance Summit, I was talking to your colleague Thomas and some other guys too, and I presented my view on this, which is if you're eating, your diet is generally very good, filling, plenty of veggies, fruits, and even within that you try to choose the lower sugar fruits, plenty of lean protein, stuff like that, some fatty, like healthy fats, you're well hydrated, you do all those things, and you still have a lot of problems maintaining a given body fat percentage, or you just feel hungry, then that probably is an indication that is just too lean for you. And I know that you're not really a fan of the set point, settling point kind of theory, but probably there is something to say that, like, if your body is just constantly telling you that, like, dude, I'm hungry, I just don't feel good, do you think that given all those other factors are in place, like food choices are generally pretty solid, then that is an indication that, dude, you just have to get a little bit fatter and you have to accept it, that that's just what's sustainable for you?
Yeah, that is definitely the practical result. I have this with a lot of female clients in particular that are men, not so much. Women tend to be more prone to diet below their sustainable level, and they'll be at the point where they've lost their menstrual cycle and they actually cope with hunger a lot. Their well-being is definitely down, libido is down, and they insist on staying there even though they have no competitive or professional aspirations with their physique. I think that is, for most people, irrational, because ultimately well-being should be most people's top priority. At least if you're have a hedonist philosophy of life and you're striving to be happy in life. The mechanism is not that you have a settling point or something. It is just that at some point you can pretty much always, with proper food choices and psychological tricks, keep hunger at bay, at least until contest prep level. So 7% or something for men, which is really like early stages of contest prep. You can get there without any hunger, but it has to get progressively more extreme. So at some point, you could live without hunger. And I think hunger is really the crucial issue here, but it will require sacrificing so many options, and just living on veggies and lean protein will be very difficult without a ketogenic diet to get enough fats in, that the well-being simply, it's not worth it. So in terms of physical health, you can easily stay at that body fat percentage. I think a lot of people here also confuse physical and mental health. I mean, physically, if you're dieting down, almost all health markers improve. If you look at any biomarker, insulin sensitivity, any marker of cardiovascular risk, blood pressure, heart rate, cholesterol, triglycerides, inflammatory markers, IL-6, everything improves with fat loss. Seriously, if you just go to a doctor, have everything scanned, lose a lot of fat, come back, you'll be healthier in pretty much every regard. The only problems physically, basically, are that at some point hormone levels tank, and in some people they can actually get below, get into the clinical range, like testosterone, especially if people don't have enough fat in their diet and they have too much of an aggressive deficit. Testosterone can reach very low levels for a natural trainee. It's actually still debatable if that is really that bad for your health in the long run in terms of longevity and stuff, but it's definitely bad for your well-being. So there is a big difference there in terms of your mental health, in terms of how happy you are, and physical health. So physical health is generally not the problem. The problem is mental health. So it's very, very much a psychological issue and a personal cost-benefit point where at some point it's just not worth it being that lean. And the nice thing is you can shift that point by giving people better tools to manage their appetite manage their physique. So that this point shift down. And that's generally what you see in that people, they cut and bulk or undergo through these cycles in their life. And progressively they do, at least if there's some progress, they do reach progressively lower levels of body fat. And every time people do a cut, they tend to get to a bit lower body fat percentage level. And ultimately, when they've mastered how to diet and train, individualize everything to their needs, they can get to a much lower level of body fat that they previously thought was sustainable.
Right. And for you, how did this progress? So, when, for example, when using ad libitum dieting and managing hunger and just feeling good, like, did you go through a progression where initially maybe you could only maintain like 15% body fat doing this, then later 12%, maybe now 10%? Was there an evolution for you?
Yeah, that is basically exactly what happened to me. If we go back even further, I started lifting when I was 65 kilos, which at 6'1" is pretty skinny. Yeah. And then I actually dropped down to 60 kilos because I wasn't eating enough. I started lifting and wasn't really paying attention to diet. Dropped to 60 because I was leaner then. Still not ripped or anything, but like six-pack lean at least. And then I had bulk and cut cycles, and at some point I learned to eat. And I think a lot of people, when they sort of learn to eat, when they bulk and they have to get their protein in, it actually becomes more difficult for them to reach low body fat levels, because a lot of people, they intuitively, like I said, they just work hard. They don't really obsess over their diet too much. They don't have that much trouble getting to a lean body fat percentage level. But when people are like, oh, you have to eat a certain amount of meals, you have to get your protein in, you have more of these urges that if I don't eat enough calories, I'll sacrifice muscle mass. Those kind of things enter into their mind. Then they actually have a lot more mental difficulty in not obsessing over their food and getting lean. So that has been when I basically started semi-effectively yo-yoing, and I probably had a lot of cuts where I ended up at like 9 to 12%. I remember from some of my first cuts with like really accurate caliper meetings, insofar as they can be accurate, put me at about 9%, about 7%. Breaking that 7% barrier, that range, was definitely difficult. And eventually for photo shoots, like you can see in my first photo shoots, I wasn't as lean as in my later shoots. Eventually I did learn to reach that level, and then he began to see what level of leanness I could maintain. And now I'm pretty capable of having the largest amount of flexibility that I've ever enjoyed in my life in terms of food choices and what I eat and how I live, and still maintain six-pack lean year-round. But for me personally, I've also definitely experienced that maintaining complete photo shoot conditioning is something I can achieve, but it's just not worth it. And for my last contest, I actually had to stay in contest shape for a period of about 6 months, a bit longer even, because the original show I had in mind I couldn't do because of IFBB regulation crap, and I had to postpone the show. And then I found out, I can maintain like literal contest level leanness for a long time, but it was absolutely not worth it.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, for women, it's almost easier to judge this because they have this clear cutoff point. Like, okay, I'm no longer menstruating. But for guys, it's more subtle things like, okay, like there's a beautiful girlfriend next to me, and like, am I really into the idea of sex? Or maybe I was into, but I'm not able to go again for like another 2 days or something. These are more subtle cues that you pick up, and then you kind of have to make the judgment call. It's like, okay, maybe I'm too lean.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just because we're running a bit low on time here, I just quickly want to touch on ad libitum dieting. Because this was something that I've been flirting with the idea for a long time. And now for the first time in my life, I actually did a very successful cut down to about 10%. I've now maintained it for about 2 months without tracking anything, not even eyeballing things, anything like that. And I know that for me, I had to go through a very, very big mindset shift. And also another thing, which we may have like a few minutes to touch on that at the end. Just being happy in general in my life was a really big key to making this work, which may sound a bit strange for other people. But, you have a topic on this in your PT course, which is very extensive, and then you talk about various psychological tricks, the fullness factor of foods, things like that. But from a mindset perspective, what do you think it requires for someone to make it actually successful to stay lean and, maintain a six-pack year-round without tracking their food?
I'd say if I had to give it in one keyword, it would be acceptance. You have to learn to accept that there is a certain level of leanness you cannot get below. You have to learn to accept that certain foods are not worth it for you, or you cannot eat and have achieve all the physique goals that you want. You have to accept what kind of body structure you have, that maybe your abs aren't structured a certain way, that you have a certain fat distribution that is, up to a point, something you cannot change. And that is really crucial to, I think, being content long term with the choices you're making. You're fully accepting just how things are, and that is something that puts you in touch with reality. That allows you to see things the way they really are, not how you want them to be, not how it's for others, but how reality for you is.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I don't know about you, but for me, ad libitum eating taught me something that was very interesting, and that was, it just makes you so much more cognizant of just general choices that you make with your diet. Because many times, people gain some fat and they track their macros, and they think that, okay, the reason I gained fat is because I miscalculated the macros on that, pack of frozen strawberries, or whatever I ate, whatever. The macros were a little bit off, and that's what caused it. But really, when you eat ad libitum, it forces you to recognize that, okay, the problem is that I was bored, I was already full, and then I just ate outside of my preset meal times, and I just ate way past fullness. And I've done that for multiple meals in a row for multiple days, and that's the problem. So it just forces you to be more cognizant. Have you noticed anything similar? Yeah,
definitely. So I think hunger is a key reason people fail on their diets, and why people eat in the first place. I mean, it's the primary drive, but there is also a very large psychological component to ad libitum dieting. And like I said, that's the things that when people think they have to get their protein in, eat at certain meal times, eat a certain amount of meals a day, worry about muscle loss. If you don't have these things and you're eating really purely about, or in tune with when you are hungry, then you often eat a lot less, and it's often not hunger that drives you. It's things like ego depletion, boredom, self-medicating on comfort food, basically, that make you eat, not really hunger. So it's definitely crucial to address those psychological issues as well during an ad libitum diet, and ideally also during a non-ad libitum diet.
Right. And just for the sake of like one or two sentences, I heard you mention a number of times that you really prioritize emphasizing the importance of overall well-being and just being happy in life. And I just came to this revelation that really, when I'm happy, when I feel like challenged in my life, I'm excited about things in my life, I just have such an easier time adhering to my diet and just making good choices with my diet overall. And how do you try to get this message across to people you're working with? And have you found this in your own personal life as well to be true?
Absolutely. And what I've discovered in my research on productivity, for example, for the book I'm doing, is that the relationship is almost always the opposite of what people think. People think hard work pays off and it makes them happy. People think they get to that certain six-pack leanness and then they'll be happy. But it's the other way around. Happiness makes you productive. Happiness makes you stick with your diet. Being happy makes everything in life so much easier. If I compare myself how I am now, when I'd say I've designed my lifestyle so that I'd say I have a 10 out of 10 lifestyle in terms of my capacity to maximize my happiness now. If I compare that to when I was a business consultant or at college when I slept like 4 hours a night because I had insomnia, I was a completely different person. And it is so much easier to make certain choices and accept certain things when you are happy overall in life than if you're not. And often many of the things is people look into the nutrition and how many carbs you're eating and the exact parameters of their program, and they're ignoring much more important lifestyle factors like stress and sleep and how happy they are overall in life. And they think the solution lies in their nutrition or their training, but it doesn't. And in terms of clients, I've talked quite a lot of clients out of using steroids, for example. I've talked clients out of competing because they were doing these things not with the idea that it would probably make them happier in life, because they just had some idea that they had to do it. And it really probably, in more deliberation, you could see that it wasn't in their best interest to do these things. So I think it's very good to make your clients aware of this, discuss why they do what they do, especially for more extreme things like competing. Then just take everything for granted.
Okay, I think that's a perfect closing sentence for this thing. And it's been awesome having you on. And when can we expect this book to come out?
I'm not going to make any commitment on that. I've seen too many people, Martin Berkman, Val McDonald, when they talk about the book, and at some point the hype actually dies off. So I'm not going to make any commitment on that. All I can say that now is I know exactly everything that I'm going to put in there. I have all the notes ready. I have all the research compiled. I have written about 100 pages, and I expect that the book's going to be about 200 pages. So take with that how you take that how you will. And that's all I can say at the moment.
Sweet. If you consider making it 400 pages, we will all be even happier.
Right. Concise though, not go into like most books. I hate books in general because a lot of people think I read tons of books, but I don't. I like scientific papers because they are very concise, and you can soak up a lot of information quite quickly. I do intend to make it a lot more reader friendly than a scientific paper. There's a lot of difficult concepts in the book, but I think like Winston Churchill said, in terms of how long a speech should be, a good speech is like a skirt. It should be long enough to cover the subject, but short enough to maintain attention.
That is perfect. And yeah, I completely agree. Recently, I got really pissed off by personal development books. Just so much filler, so much repetition. And yeah, like if I read your articles on range frequency theory and on the science of binge drinking, I get way more out of it than many of the several 100-page long books that I read. So yeah, you echo my sentiment. Cool. It's been really awesome to have you on. Any resources and just pointing people to your work, where they can find you, all that stuff?
My website, BayesianBodybuilding.com. You can find everything on there.
Wonderful. Cool, Menno. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure.
All right, guys, Abel here again. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please subscribe on YouTube if you watched it there. I come out with new content every week there, whether it's in the form of a podcast episode like this, which I actually aim to do one of every week, or some shorter informational video. Also, if you could just leave a comment and suggest some people that you'd like me to interview or just topics you'd like me to cover, it would be very helpful to know how I can better serve you. And if you listen to it in podcast format, if you could leave a rating on iTunes, it would greatly help out the show, and I would be more than grateful for it. So thanks, guys, for hanging out up until now. Thanks for being here, and see you all next week.